Welcome back to Creepy Clips, and in today's video, I wanted to take an extremely close look into one of the killers on the roster of Dead by Daylight. Now, this asymmetrical horror game has created many a great killers over its tenure, and one of the most well-known killers they were able to attain a license for comes from the mind of the master of horror himself, Wes Craven. He thrives on inflicting his will and insensing fear into his victims before leaving them bloody, cold, and lifeless. During an interview with Vulture, Wes Craven recounted the tale that inspired him to create the sadistic horror villain that killed and collected souls throughout the town of Springwood. Craven explained, "I'd read an article in the LA Times about a family who had escaped the killing fields in Cambodia and managed to get to the US. Things were fine, and then suddenly the young son was having very disturbing nightmares. He told his parents he was afraid that if he slept, the thing chasing him would get him, so he tried to stay awake for days at a time. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought the crisis was over. Then they heard screams in the middle of the night. By the time they got to him, he was dead. He died in the middle of a nightmare. Here was a youngster having a vision of horror that everyone older was denying. That became the central line of A Nightmare on Elm Street." According to the book Never Sleep Again, The Elm Street Legacy, another direct life inspiration to help Wes create the Dream Demon was when he was a child. A creepy old man who was wearing a fedora, who Craven thought was drunk, would walk along the path outside his window. He then stopped and stared up at the young horror genius, wide-eyed, holding the stare. Craven recalled this man scaring the shit out of him. Craven quickly ducked away from the window, thinking he would be gone, but when he went back to the window, the bizarre man was still standing there, staring at him even more intently, as if to say, "Yes, I'm still here." When the man did move on, it was towards the apartment building entrance. The bizarre man could then be heard coming up the stairs, so Wes's brother grabbed a baseball bat, but when his brother ran out, the man was gone, never to be heard from again. Craven went on to say that this memory stuck with him and made him more curious about the psychology of this strange man's desire to scare a child like this. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm talking about the Soul Collector, the Dream Demon, the bastard son of 100 maniacs, and most famously known as the Springwood Slasher, Freddy Krueger. Now, Krueger's sadistic characteristics were developed from his childhood. The torture he suffered from his abusive alcoholic caregiver would leave such a stain of viciousness that it would carry on with him all the way to his life as an adult. Krueger, feeling he never counted and always looked over, felt he had no future, so he decided he would take all the abuse and anger that he suffered throughout his life and inflicted in the children of Elm Street. The man with a claw got his name directly from Wes's childhood bully, Fred Krueger. Classic killers wore a mask, like Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, Ghostface, and Michael Myers. His scarred and burned figure was created because Craven wanted to create an ultra-scary and intimidating horror figure that stood out from the rest. Countless children were slain by the slasher, but when he was finally caught and ready to be sentenced, evidence was improperly handled and Krueger was set free. The parents of the victims then took the law into their own hands in the form of murderous revenge. They hunted him down, trapped him, and proceeded to lynch him to a fiery death. As he was on his way to succumbing to his demise, he was visited by 3 dream demons.
We know what you want.
I want it all!
Of course you do.
Then open up,
And you shall be
forever!
These dream demons not only gave Freddy the power to live forever, but if by chance he was killed off in the dream world, they would bring him back to life. He was also given the power to teleport throughout the dream world and kill anybody in their dreams. The dread he instills in his victims give power and strength, terrorizing his prey, filling them completely with paranoia and fear, forcing them to not want to sleep, knowing if they did, they would most likely never wake up again. Now, in the eyes of this merciless entity that controls the dark realms of the trials, this is exactly the type of viciousness that is sought after in a sadistic killer. Only the most insane and psychotic broken minds are chosen and taken from their world and brought into the universe of Dead by Daylight. Now, the entity kept a watchful eye on this next prospect, seeing how the nightmare stalked and preyed on a young teenager, Quentin Smith, through the streets of Springwood. As Freddy closed in on the target with nothing but malicious intent, a blue flame blossomed, engulfing the area. Quentin then took flight as Freddy burst from the flames and raged even more. The fear was so strong from Quentin, Freddy could taste it. Suddenly, Freddy felt another presence with him. It felt dark, old, and powerful. He then felt the need to pause and drew back his bladed glove. A highly unpleasant vapor then enveloped him. Suddenly, an echoing groan of metal crushing against metal could be heard all around him. Freddy was then taken seemingly by this old, powerful presence and found himself falling and spinning before finding himself back in Bedham Preschool. Freddy having no clue where Quentin had gone, but other prey walked the hallways. A new batch of victims, new strains of fear, new stains to bloody the razor blade fingers on his victimizing glove of terror. This was a dream come true for Krueger, but the worst possible nightmare for these unsuspecting survivors. So keeping the last 5 minutes and 52 seconds in mind, I've covered the creation process that led to Krueger's manifestation through the eyes of the guru of gore, Wes Craven, the sadistic nature of the old man, the dream-stalking figure of the Asian death syndrome, and the name and toying personality of his childhood bully. In my opinion, the most well-thought-out and scariest, most terrifying killer in the history of the horror genre. The reason I bring all of this up is because, well, to be quite frank, I feel the developers at Behaviour have not done justice by the late Wes Craven and his greatest creation. The amount of late nights and early mornings he put in to create such a monster for the fans of the world that love horror films, like myself and so many others, was just simply incredible. Now, don't get me wrong, Behaviour has created a fantastic game in Dead by Daylight, which I love and have over 5,000 hours in. The fact that they were able to bring such a classic to the roster of killers is insanely amazing. Now, since he arrived in the fog on October 26, 2017, he was considered by a lot of players to be massively overpowered. His original power started out with survivors who are awake do not see or hear the nightmare. Once targeted by the nightmare's powers, survivors enter the dream transition for 7 seconds. During the dream transition, they can see the nightmare intermittently. When the dream transition has expired, the survivor is pulled into the dream world. Once in the dream world, survivors' ores are revealed to the nightmare whenever they are outside of his terror radius. Survivors also suffer an action speed penalty of minus 50%. To exit the dream world, survivors can find other awake survivors to wake them up. Failed skill checks also work, and getting hooked can also wake up a sleeping survivor. Now, being honest and unbiased as I always am, looking at his original powers, survivors who are awake and don't see Freddy coming, it is OP, but that's how Freddy's powers work. Awake survivors can see what Freddy is doing to dreaming survivors. I mean, look at the first kill of the 2010 remake. That's exactly how he kills his first victim. Chris, who is awake, watches on as Dean kills himself with a knife, but really, he's being killed by Freddy in his nightmare. Being an awake survivor and going against Freddy was a nightmare come true. Spine-chilling, hair-raising, palpable, and scary. Not knowing where he is, having him pop up and appear out of nowhere, was something that actually gave me multiple jump scares a game. Seeing a breaking pallet destroyed in thin air with nobody around, or a survivor floating being carried, it's things like this that keep you with your head on a swivel. It kept the game really fun. The whole point of Dead by Daylight. Something the game has gotten away from, but that's a whole other conversation for a whole other video. Let's also not forget the Wraith basically has the same power, but instead of pulling survivors into the dream world like the nightmare does before attacking, he just simply has to uncloak, which takes the same amount of time. Between the Wraith and the nightmare, that power should have stayed with the nightmare, considering that it's his power to begin with. And if people are mad that Freddy had that power, why aren't they mad that the Wraith has it? Huh. Food for thought, I guess.
Bon appetit, bitch.
Now, Freddy having to take 7 seconds to pull somebody into the dream world before he could hit them doesn't make much sense either. Freddy's method was always to force survivors into the dream world by keeping them awake long enough that once they finally fell asleep, they couldn't wake up again. The devs should have an energy status bar system put in place for Freddy. We're chasing each survivor for a certain amount of time, in combination with enough fear being built up if they are in the terror radius will cause the energy of that survivor to be lowered. Once their energy is depleted, they enter the dream world. Add-ons can also be used to speed up the rate at which survivors lose energy. Now, waking up from the dream world gives a huge advantage to the killer. You have to either blow a skill check on a gen and give your location away, stab someone while healing them, which delays the heal and prolongs them from doing objectives. Another option is to find someone who's awake and get them to wake you up. And the last way is to be hooked. I do like the alarm clock idea to wake up from the dream world, but I would rework it a little bit. So an awake survivor can go at the start of a trial and can set an alarm clock that starts once that survivor goes into the dream world. When the timer goes off, the survivor doesn't need to go and find the alarm clock, it just goes off in their head and they're awake. Kinda like how the hemorrhagic needle works. Inject it and wait, and then you're healed. I find this way, alarm clocks would be more accurately used by the survivors against the nightmare than just finding one, shaking it, and waking up. That just seems kinda lame to me. Once survivors are in the dream world, Freddy can see all survivors' auras wherever they are outside of his terror radius. Now this one I do like, but it is really overpowered. This should have been made into a perk instead of a power, with a cooldown instead. Now the action speed penalty of minus 50%, that is a freaking joke. There can be a reduction in action speed while in the dream world, but 50% is way too much. Now on to the Nightmare's patches. Patch 1.8.1 came out, and it had 4 changes for the Nightmare, which were all considered nerfs. A 10-second delay will be added after leaving the Nightmare's terror radius before survivors' auras will be revealed to him. I still think it should be a perk with a cooldown, not a power, because it is very overpowering. But adding 10 seconds before seeing auras is better than nothing. The next change they would implement would be to increase the Nightmare's terror radius from 16 meters to 24 meters. This change would allow survivors more room to maneuver around the Nightmare without having their auras read for being outside of his terror radius. This change brings his terror radius to the same range as its lullaby. The third change on this patch would be to increase the duration of the Nightmare's movement speed penalty for putting a survivor into the dream transition from 1 second to 3 seconds. This change would allow survivors to put more distance between themselves and the Nightmare before they fall asleep and become vulnerable to his attacks. And the last change on patch 1.8.1 for the Nightmare would be dying survivors who are healed to the injured state are automatically woken up. The next 2 changes that would come to the Nightmare were considered to be quality of life changes. It would come during patch 1.8.2. The first quality of life change would be to reduce the movement speed penalty for continuously casting the Dream Demon to 95%. This change was motivated by the developers deeming the old penalty was too intense. The second quality of life change was to reduce the interaction and attack cooldown when successfully putting a survivor into the dream transition to 0.5 seconds. The next change was also considered a nerf that came in patch 1.9.2, which removed the unintentional ability to put survivors inside lockers into the dream transition. Kinda funny. On to patch 2.0.0, where this next change would be considered a quality of life change where they fixed an issue that caused the Nightmare to vault more slowly than other killers. In patch 2.3.0, another quality of life change would come in the form of reducing the footstep audio. This patch and the last 2 patches I consider to be very good changes. Then patch 3.1.0 came along, and this was the rework, an extensive rework of the Nightmare and his powers. Let's take a look. The first change we would see would come in the form of awake survivors seeing the Nightmare always within 16 meters, intermittently within 32 meters, and never went farther than 32 meters away. Now this one bugs me because awake survivors never see Freddy. They would only see him if he was brought out of the dream world, so awake survivors shouldn't be seeing him at all. Now if the developers watch one of the Nightmare movies, they would know this. When there's an interaction between Freddy and a dreaming survivor, then I can see awake survivors seeing them. But besides that, there's no reason why awake survivors should be seeing Freddy at all. First change, not a good one in my book. The next change we would see with the Nightmare rework would be survivors would experience microsleep, passively falling asleep within 60 seconds. This seems real close to the same thing Quentin was talking about in the Nightmare remake in 2010, but it was micro nibs instead of microsleep.
Well, it says nightmares are triggered by the belief that the dreamer has no control and this can cause insomnia. But then it says at the 70-hour mark, the insomniac will begin to experience micro naps. His brain will begin to shut down its functions for several seconds in an attempt to recharge itself. This basically means that you're dreaming, but you don't know it. Like, even if you're awake.
If this was the route the developers wanted to take from Quentin in that library scene with Nancy, then why not go all the way? It would make for better suspenseful gameplay. Survivors could see these micronibs or horrific visions throughout the trial. Imagine seeing other survivors in gruesome predicaments, instead of just casually falling asleep every 60 seconds or so. Think how much more scary and immersive that would be, knowing that this is what you're in for when you realize you're going against the nightmare. The next part of this rework would see a way for survivors to wake up from the dream world, with alarm clocks being placed on dressers throughout the map. Instead of the nightmare's terror radius, asleep survivors would hear a two-dimensional lullaby instead. Getting woken up by an awake survivor will increasingly take more time after each successful attempt. Even though it's a rework, the nightmare received a new ability to have dream traps, dream snares, or dream pallets. The last part of this rework would see the nightmare receive a new ability. He will now be able to teleport between unrepaired generators using dream projection. 3.2.0 was the next patch that came out for the nightmare. It was considered to be a buff when they added an oblivious status effect to the nightmare's power. Survivors are oblivious whenever they are asleep and in the dream world. I do like this because it makes sense and aligns with his powers in the dream world. The last big patch for the nightmare was 4.7.0. The first change was considered a quality of life improvement, which increased the brightness of the dream world on the indicator on the HUD. The next 4 changes were all considered nerfs. The quality of life change increased the brightness of the dream world indicator on the HUD. The first nerf added a movement speed penalty while placing dream snares, which would slow the nightmare down to a 4.0 ms or 100%. The second nerf reduced the maximum number of placed dream snares from 8 to 5. The third nerf reduced the maximum number of placed dream pallets from 10 to 7. And the fourth and last nerf would have survivors that would use alarm clocks. They'd be granted full immunity from falling asleep for 30 seconds, including when the nightmare would attack them. This is indicated on the HUD by a yellow sleep timer ticking down. They also made some changes when they revisited some add-ons. Not sure of this last patch, it seems to be unknown the date of it, but there was a change of the difficulty rating from hard to moderate. Alright, now that the patch notes of the nightmare have been covered, here's my honest thoughts. Let me know if you agree, disagree, or have other ideas of what the devs could have done instead of what they did. I feel that if the developers just made the aura reading reveal power into a perk with the cooldown, there wouldn't have been such a need to have that power scrapped. I mean, it still didn't work with a 10-second delay after survivors were out of Freddy's terror radius before survivors' auras will be revealed to him. I don't know why they just didn't even consider making it into a perk before scrapping it altogether. Now on to the dream traps. First, the dream snare. Nightmare creates blood pools of souls that reach up and grab dreaming survivors as they enter it. The effect of the snares hinder the survivors for a short time while in the snare and after leaving it. Freddy's dream snares I really do not like. In the dream world, survivors can see you placing them and they just run through them when you're not around to get rid of them. Just like what survivors do against the Trapper's bear traps. At least with the Trapper, he has add-ons that can injure or put survivors in a dying state if you set them off. The amount that the dream snare hinders a survivor is definitely not enough. Look at this chase. Multiple traps have been laid out to catch the survivor, and Freddy still can't catch up to them. And if the survivors see a snare, they can just go around it. So really, how beneficial is the dream snare? Not to mention, you have to take a few seconds to place each one. So by the time you got them placed, the survivor is gone. But even then, you have to be pretty close to your target to hit them. Otherwise, their very, very brief hindering effect is gone, and they are back to normal speed. The Nightmare honestly has a better chance to get the down by just using his bladed glove. Look at this example. These survivors are running through multiple dream snares I put down. I don't know about you, but I don't see a hindering effect slowing them down whatsoever. This needs to be reworked or just gone altogether. Now the location notification of the survivor that triggers a snare is the better benefit between the two that the dream snare comes with. Now the dream pallets, they have better effectiveness against newer survivors, but when you go against more experienced survivors, I notice as the game goes on, they can tell what a dream pallet is compared to a real pallet, and they drop them quickly. So it can be a crapshoot of how effective the dream pallets are based on the experience level of the survivors you're facing. I do like the trickery that dream palettes present survivors when they're in a chase. That can lead to a hit, a down, or even a hook. So in my opinion, between the two, I think they both have their benefits and they both have their weaknesses. Also, with add-ons, you can blind or reveal the survivor's aura to punish them even further. So for me, it's a toss-up. I don't have a favorite personally, but let me know what you would choose as your favorite dream trap and why. Dream snares or dream palettes? Now on to the Nightmare's teleportation ability. Even with the 15% reduction in cooldown for each survivor in the dream world, the way it is now, I do not like it. Why? Because each time a generator is completed, Freddy can't teleport to that gen anymore, so it's less area for his ability to access at a faster rate of speed. By the time the last gen is completed, he can't teleport anywhere, which drives me nuts because that's his most powerful ability. Last gen done and he's a basic attack killer and has to walk around to find survivors or get to the exit gate. Very, very frustrating to see this power not be better designed. The fact they took away the aura reading ability when survivors are outside his terror radius, combined with weak ability design for his dream projection, including the amount of a heads up survivors get to know before he's coming. This lets them get a clear head start to get away from the area. Even with add-ons to see their auras, it's not a good teleporting system. The whole point of a teleport is to get to it fast and get the hit fast, not to have to use an add-on still track them down and chase them. It just added more reasons as to why gamers don't play him anymore. He's weak and unfinished. Now the best part about Freddy, I would say that is perfect and doesn't need fixing at all, is his oblivious status effect that dreaming survivors suffer from. Being able to sneak up and slash or snatch a survivor off a gen with no warning is just too good. The amount of times I've done this must have given people playing that survivor being hit a bloody heart attack. Now on to the dream world. Its look and environment needs a complete overhaul. I mean, look at this. All I see is a lighter version of the murky region and what looks to be ashes floating around. Very boring and uninteresting. The dream world is supposed to be a nightmare, Freddy's world, a place you definitely don't want to be. The vibe of the dream world doesn't scream danger at all. Playing as Survivor or Freddy just annoys my vision when I'm trying to see things around the map. Now the intensity of the dream world needs to be cranked up to 100. Jump scares, micro nibs, anything that makes your skin crawl. Playing tricks on survivors, making them think they're in the dream world, but really could still be awake. This game is all about mind games, so why not take the killer that plays the best mind games ever and utilize it more? Maybe seeing shadows of Freddy walking around, but it's really not him, just more of an illusion. It puts the survivors on edge more. Dream World could be way more scarier and dark, kind of like the Lights Out event we had. There's so much potential with this killer that hasn't even been tapped into yet. The next section of this video that I want to discuss is the cosmetics of the Nightmare on Elm Street chapter. I originally only bought Freddy, but then later on I wanted to buy Quentin, but because I wanted his alternate outfit, I had to buy the chapter. Now I am fully aware that the license that Behaviour obtained was for the 2010 remake and not the 1984 original. I know besides what he comes with and his bloody prestige cosmetics, he's got nothing else. But with that being said, at the very least, why hasn't Freddy been given a Christmas sweater? I mean, Chucky came out and shortly thereafter, he had one. At least give the Nightmare that. Another thing I don't understand is the lack of survivors with this chapter. Why isn't there more of them from the movie, like Nancy, Chris, or Jesse? Nancy is the Nightmare's favorite. Combined with Chris, Jesse, and Quentin, these four are the main teenagers that Freddy is driven to kill. The Stranger Things and Resident Evil chapters have at least 2 survivors for their respective chapters. So why doesn't an iconic franchise like a Nightmare on Elm Street get more characters and cosmetics? Especially that Freddy Christmas sweater. While you're at it, why not give Michael Myers one too? In this next section, I want to go over the Nightmare's 3 personal perks: Fire Up, Blood Warden, and Remember Me. First up, Fire Up. Each time a generator is completed, Fire Up grows in power and gains 1 token up to a maximum of 5 tokens. Each token applies a stackable buff of 3, 3.5, and 4% up to a maximum of 15, 17.5, and 20% depending on what tier of Fire Up you have, to the following action speeds: picking up and dropping survivors, breaking breakable walls and pallets and damaging generators, and vaulting windows. It's Trapper's perk Brutal Strength basically, partially the Cannibal's perk Bamboozle, and honestly the dropping and picking up survivors, I don't care for at all. There are such better perk ideas that this could have been replaced with. Moving on now to my favorite of his 3 unique perks, Blood Warden. As soon as one exit gate is opened, Blood Warden activates. The auras of survivors standing within the exit gates are revealed to you. Once per trial, hooking a survivor while Blood Warden is active calls upon the entity to block the exits for all survivors for 30, 40, and 60 seconds, depending on what tier of Blood Warden you have. This one is straight mean, and it goes right with the Nightmare's personality, and it goes back to when survivors' auras could be seen when they are outside his terror radius. And last but not least, Remember Me. Whenever the obsession loses a health state by any means, Remember Me gains 1 token, up to a maximum of 2, 3, or 4 tokens, depending what tier you're on of Remember Me, increasing the opening time for exit gates by 6 seconds per token, up to a maximum of 12, 18, and 24 seconds, again, depending on what tier of Remember Me you have. All survivors will be affected other than the obsession. I find this perk in comparison to Freddy's other skills. Plus, it's just a very watered-down version of Trickster's No Way Out perk. I also came up with some pretty cool ideas for new perks based on the skill set we know he possesses. Let me know your thoughts on these, and if you have any perk ideas that you have that you would like to see in the Nightmare's arsenal. One of Freddy's strongest powers is when he kills. The soul of that survivor is claimed and absorbed by the Nightmare. I call this perk Soul Sucker. This would gain him haste from the sacrificed survivor. The devs could have implemented this easily by giving Freddy a small increase of speed for each survivor killed. This would last for the remainder of the trial. Elasticity is another power that the Nightmare's mastered. The most notable will be the stretching of his arms, head, and body. I call this one Reach Out and Touch Someone. This is another implementation that the devs could have done. This would be such a cool perk, allowing Freddy to be able to hit his victims from afar, like a range attack like Huntress's hatchets, Xenomorph's tail, the Clown's bottles, and the Executioner's Trail of Torment, among many others. Nightmare controls another power that Freddy possesses and utilizes often to confuse and control his prey. I call this next perk Auditory Illusion. In the dream world, Krueger can make survivors hear generators with repair progress on them that actually don't have any, purposely causing confusion, pulling them in different directions, trying to find gens to finish them, then realizing when they get there, they don't have any progress on them at all, just to waste their time. Talk about a mind game. Another really cool power Freddy possesses can be used as a perk or as a mechanic. We saw this in Dream Warriors, when Freddy was in the sky looking down, gaining a bird's eye view advantage of where his survivors are, toying with them while terrorizing them at the same time. This one I call View from the Top. The devs can put this into Freddy's mechanics the same way they do with the Dr. Shock Therapy and Static Blast. But for the Nightmare, they can keep his dream projection with one button and add another button for View from the Top. It would work like the My Little Oni event they had earlier in the year. This would give Freddy a certain amount of time to be massively huge with a view from the sky to see survivors and form an attack. The second last perk idea I came up with is called Duplication. Freddy can split himself into 2 in the dream world, one controlled by the player and the other controlled by a bot. I think of this power when you can be in more than one place at the same time. As kids, I know we all remember playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. Against the last boss, you go against the evil Shredder, and he has the power to confuse and attack his enemies when he splits into 2, creating hectic pressure on his foes. This could be a really deceptive mind game the developers could implement to Freddy's perk game, creating a mitosis effect, splitting the Nightmare into 2. Having 2 Freddys coming at you in the dream world will be a nightmare, pun intended. Now the last of my new perk ideas for Freddy is my favorite of them all. It's the most used skill of the Nightmare. I call it shapeshifting. Again, only in the dream world Freddy can shapeshift. Now this is a bit evil. Well, it's a bit more than a bit evil, but the only form he can change into is another survivor that's in the match already. The point is to cause confusion and mistrust of other players. This would keep the survivors on their heels and their heads on a swivel. When Freddy is in survivor form, when he attacks, he shapeshifts from the form of a survivor and back into Freddy. Think about the state of mind the actual gamers playing would be thinking. Is this a survivor coming up on me, or is it Freddy walking up to kill me? Consider that the devs could make Chucky and Charles Lee Ray go back and forth between doll and human form. I doubt it would be difficult for them to have the nightmare shapeshift from Survivor back to Freddy. The Nightmare on Elm Street horror film franchise is my absolute favorite of any in the genre. Hence why Freddy Krueger is my all-time favorite horror killer. I've been a Freddy Krueger fan since the original film came out back in 1984. I truly believe all of these changes would make me play Freddy more than I already do. And I know that the other Nightmare gamers that play Dead by Daylight, who are massive fanatics of Freddy Krueger, would also play him more as well if these changes were implemented. You can't start him overpowered, then nerf him and leave him the way he is. Considering he can only warp to generators, the more gens that get done, the less range of the map he has. When the last gen pops, he can't warp anywhere on the map, so he can't even use his own power. It's completely broken. Imagine the nurse not being able to blink to certain parts of the map. She wouldn't be considered the strongest killer in the game, and nobody would play her. Now that's just imagining what would happen with the nurse if they took her power away. They weaken Freddy so much in so many ways that it's extremely rare to go against him nowadays. Or how about the unknown? They have the power to teleport to any location on the map instantly, while the Nightmare has to take time before he can teleport. The instant teleport is a power that Freddy should have. It's literally what he does, and it's a huge part of his skill set. He's not even as strong as a trapper when the last gen pops. At least with a trapper, you can still get caught in bear traps. I'm just really confused as to why Behaviour is massively underutilizing him. People like myself have paid real money for Auric cells to pay for the Nightmare chapter, and for them to just put out such a lazy effort into this mega iconic killer is just infuriating. Like, why go out and buy the license for the king of slasher films? Yes, I might get debated on that, but that's okay. But for real, I don't see why they went out and got the license for him and then just trashed him and washed their hands of him. If anybody knows why, I would love to know, so let me know down in the comments, because for the life of me, I just can't figure it out. Now, I've gone through just about everything about the Nightmare from top to bottom with a fine-tooth comb. The way he is just not good at all. From add-ons to his dream projection to his perks, all the way down to the dream world atmosphere and his overall mechanics. He just needs a complete overhaul. It's like they haven't watched the Nightmare on Elm Street movies to study his powers or overall vibe. Doing so would have made for such an unbelievably awesome killer. It's straight up mind-boggling that they have left him the way he is, with no plans to improve him or be more like he really should be. Now don't worry, the one thing I haven't brought up is his Mori, and I know. Now I do like it very much, as it directly correlates with the movie's version of 2010. If you watch my video about Mori's Escape If You Can or Die by the Hand, you know I think it needs more blood, and Freddy's glove goes right through his victim's chest, but yet no hole after the glove is gone. It needs to be more realistic with what the kill does to the body. Also, I thought of a really cool idea that the background during the Mori could transition from the dream world to the boiler room to really enhance the kill. The last thing I want to mention is, why is there no tome for the Nightmare chapter? And with that being said, it's time to wrap up another video here at Creepy Clips. I hope you've enjoyed the video and found my analysis of the Nightmare entertaining and informative. If you want to see more in-depth and fun content like this, then please consider liking the video and subscribing. It's free, and as you know, it really helps grow my channel and get out some more fans of Dead by Daylight and horror movies. This video took a lot of time and research to put all together, so the support is really appreciated. I would love to know your thoughts on everything I have covered, and what's your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie. If you have an idea for a video like this and you want to see me do it, let me know down in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time here at Creepy Clips.